details, but I'm going to hit the highlights of these 3 chapters for you. But to get us started, I want to tell you a story. My granddaughter, Sydney, who's now 5, and I were playing this game that had cards to it. And it was a matching game of sorts. And I said, she goes, "Papa, you want to play with me?" And I said, "Sure." So I sat down and we're about to play. I said, "What are the rules?" And she goes, "I don't know." She said, "You don't know the rules?" She goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Neither do I." "So how are we going to play this?" "You just do it like this." And so she started piling cards on other cards. And I go, "Oh, okay." So I piled a couple of cards, and then she piled another. I go, "Oh, you won." And she loved it. She laughed, thought it was great, you know. And so I thought, well, turnabout's fair play. I should get to win next time, right? So we're playing and dumping a bunch of cards, and I put one, "Oh, I win." And she goes, "No, you didn't." I said, "Wait a minute. How do you know I didn't win?" She goes, because I wanted to win. Now, that presupposes an idea that I think is very true in our society. We like laws and rules as long as we win. And when we don't win, we don't like laws and rules, right? I like what Bruce told me last week that, we have those wonderful signs that suggest how fast we're supposed to go or not go over that. They're just grand suggestions, right? Until the police officer pulls you over and writes you a ticket for going way past that number. But, we kind of treat rules in our society a little bit like that. So I had the basic kind of the question in my mind, what is justice? And I kind of want us to kind of have a little feedback here on it. Well, what do you think is just? How do you know if something is just? When a ruling comes down from the courts, there are always people on either side saying, "No, that wasn't justice." And somebody else saying, "That was justice." And, I remember, oh man, in my church in Oceanside, I had guys who were so angry about this when O.J. Simpson was acquitted of his crime. And they just thought this was a travesty of justice. And as their pastor, I was concerned more about them and their attitude than I was about the courtroom, because I figured whether he gets justice here or gets justice when Christ returns, it doesn't matter. God's going to take care of business. I seem to recall from Romans chapter 13, a quote from the Old Testament where it says, "I will avenge, I will repay, says the Lord." So there is a sense that God is going to bring justice at the end of time. So when justice is not served here, I tend to think, okay, well, we just need to be patient because God will take care of business. And when we think in terms of justice, there are 2 fashions of it. There's kind of, like in the business world, they wonder about, justice in the sense of like compensation. So you either have equality or equity. Equality is everybody gets paid the same thing no matter how good they do. And equity, a person gets paid more for being more productive and more intelligent and more creative and that kind of thing, where another person who isn't producing doesn't get paid as much. So that's equity. Equality is everybody gets paid the same straight across. And I think in our country, we fight over that, everybody should be paid the same for the same wage for the same amount of time and effort. And yet people who supervise them go, "I'm sorry, they're just not doing the job. They're not coming in on time, they're not focused. This other guy is doing twice the amount of work that they're doing. He should get paid more," type attitude. So we have this conflict in our society over justice. When a court ruling comes down from the Supreme Court, oh my goodness, it's like nobody's happy with them. I mean, no matter which way they turn, there's going to be somebody really angry about it. So how do we determine what is just? Any suggestions you have? How do we determine what is right and what is wrong? What is just and what is unjust? Anybody? Boy, did I throw out the philosophical question of the decade? Because if you're cheated, you want justice. If somebody brutally harms a family member, there's a good part of you that really wants justice. You want that person caught and punished. I remember years ago I was on a court trial. It was actually a civil suit between a man who owned a bus company and a large corporation who also had a subsidiary. Part of it was a bus company. And he wanted to make a bid for the San Joaquin County schools. So what they did in that area in that time is that everybody put in a secret bid. A secret bid is, you make a bid that you think is fair, and you hand it to them, and they take all the secret bids. Nobody else knows what's being bid, and they look at them and they choose the one they want. Meaning generally the cheapest one, or the one that they get the most benefit out of. And this man felt that this large corporation came in and after everything was said and done, underbid him through having information about his business through a subsidiary of the corporation. So, in other words, they proved to our jury, guess who got to be chairman? The chairman of the jury. And I was just a lowly youth pastor at the time, but they let me be chairman because I guess I had a big mouth. But we ended up voting that this man was actually cheated and that they used corporate espionage techniques to find out what kind of bid he would have made, and then they would way undercut him. So that they figured if they do that for a couple of years, they ride the cost out, that he'll be gone and they can come in and own the territory. That was their attitude. So there was not only he won, at least in that court, I don't know how it was appealed later, but in that particular decision, he won $300,000 that he was wanting in damages. And then there was a punitive measure that we, the jury, could put on because this corporation made $20 million profit in the last 3 or 4 years each year. So we decided that 10% of their profits should go to this guy. So this guy not only got $300,000, but he could have gotten as much as $2.3 million. Now, is that fair? Is that just? Is that the right way to do things? How do we determine what is just? Derek. Really? Sure. That's judgment. It's discernment. Terry, I love you. And when you throw it out at me like you don't judge, I don't think that's true. I think there is a judgment within believers that we keep each other accountable. But we always have to remember that we will be judged the same way we judge other people.
It's not an easy process.
It's it's hard. It's probably safer never to judge, because that way, theoretically, you would never be judged, except being a person who never makes a judgment. And like, you don't know anything, so no, but you understand. Go ahead, Dave. I don't know either, because I couldn't hear it either, but I was just impressed that the girl prayed, and I was happy to have her pray, so. Well, you go beat up those bullies and, pin them in the ground. So, the idea would be to forgive and to pray for them. Now, we didn't really solve the bullying issue here. All we did was we were going to pray for grace and dealing with those bullies. So, I could do a sermon on bullying. Okay, you're going to talk louder because the back row can't hear you. So, back row can't hear you. Just just as you couldn't hear me. So what he's saying is that as John teaches us that we need to love, correct? That in that process, that we love people, even when they are non-believers. We show them grace, God's grace, and do our best to let God wrestle with the justice issue. Here's the point I want to bring out. The people of Israel have now traveled 3 months out of Egypt. They were slaves, oppressed, being mistreated constantly. Now 3 months down the line, they're standing at the foot of the mountain, Mount Sinai. They have just heard God tell them the 10 Commandments. Freaked them out. And then now, God is telling Moses, here are the laws I want you to live under. So chapter 22 talks a lot about dealing with the issues of personal injury, theft, social laws of mercy and grace, and ultimately dealing with the main issues of restitution, compassion, worship, and the covenant. That takes all 3 of those chapters in one shot. Now, remember last week I gave you kind of a sermon, and before you go to it, Lisa, remember last week's sermon in a sentence? You guys, any remember that at all? It was not memorable at all. It was one of those things. I used a phrase that was a contrast. I said, being a slave of Christ is... Did I just lose my battery power? Okay. And microphone. Well, where's the one that we had? Testing. I said last week, being a slave of Christ is true freedom. And what I was trying to say was that by allowing ourselves to be servants of Christ, we find the freedom that we desire and need, the joy, the peace, and the love. This week, I want to say that the law gives us peace with others, but the Spirit gives us life. Now, when we talk about the law of the Old Testament, we're talking about how a whole group of people were now to learn to survive, living together. Remember back in chapter 18, the apostle, that Moses had taken his father-in-law Jethro's advice, and he brought out all these judges, one over 1,000, one over 500, one over 100, one over 50, one over 10. And so he had this appellate system created. And so now God is giving these people the laws with which they could govern themselves. So if you look at verses 1 through 14 of chapter 22, you'll see a commonality with the 8th commandment, which is do not steal.